morning. I'm really honored to be here at the first Nordic Psychedelic Science Conference, and yesterday was, it was really amazing to get to hear more about the history of psychedelics in the Nordic countries and about the current research that's going on, and I really appreciate being invited to share our research too, so thank you. I'm going to be talking about our implementation plan for how do we see MDMA for PTSD being implemented. This is a really difficult to treat mental health condition, and it has large societal implications, and we really want to handle this carefully as a nonprofit and a public benefit corporation, and really try to bring it forward in a way that puts public benefit first, but also allows us to become a sustainable organization. You heard a little bit about our phase 2 and phase 3 data yesterday, so I'm going to kind of assume some familiarity with our program and us and try to dive into what we know much less about, which is the future of what this looks like. So I'm going to just give a little outline of what I'm going to talk about, but before I do, I want to talk about the vision that I had when I started working on this. So in the late 90s, by kind of a random circumstance, I was introduced to this field through attendance at a small conference like this called the Mind States. And then at that conference in the early 2000s, I met Rick Doblin, who was the founder and had started MAPS a few years before. And I heard about his vision of really turning it into a small nonprofit pharma company to bring MDMA through the drug development process so it could be available again after it had been scheduled. And when I heard his vision, I felt truly called to use my experience in drug development. I'd been working in vaccine research for a long time to bring MDMA through this process. And I felt like it was such a profound idea and really necessary. And I could see that it could be possible to take it through the system just like any other drug. And I think my vision was probably really naive and narrow at the time. I never really expected it to be what it is today. I never expected to be running a psychedelic company of this size or speaking internationally to so many people who also carry hope for this research. And I'm truly amazed and grateful for how the field has evolved. And what I've learned about vision is that mine was and is really just a really small piece of an expanding puzzle. And it was probably necessary at the time that I met Rick for me to only really see a small piece of it so that I wouldn't have been overwhelmed by actually how much work it is, how long it would take, and how much it would cost. And over these years, I've learned to let it keep really growing and expanding organically and to be more inclusive of all the ideas. And that each person that will come to this will have their own vision to carry this work into new areas. And that many of you here are already a part of this, or you will be, and you're all going to expand it into something greater. So with that, I'm going to share with you our little piece of it, which is our vision for what we think implementation could look like. So we're committed at MAPS and the Public Benefit Corporation to trying to make MDMA-assisted therapy a first-in-class treatment. To the best of our knowledge, it would be the first integrated drug plus supportive therapy treatment to be approved by FDA. And our vision includes finding ways post-approval to maintain a really high quality of care with strong outcomes and to create or support the creation of systems of accountability, ethics, and safety as this field evolves. It will also include, in our future, many negotiations with healthcare payers and regulators, as we want to ensure that if this is approved, there's equitable access. One of the ways that we can help ensure equitable access is by training a large cross-section of providers so that patients have the ability to select a provider that has a similar cultural background and/or a lived experience to themselves. We hope that this is going to be a historic approval of a psychedelic therapy, and that if we do the work well and in collaboration, it will serve to pave the way for a psychedelic healing ecosystem that many stakeholders around the world are currently working on developing. I'm going to quickly give a little overview of PTSD and MDMA so that we have a kind of a common baseline to go from when I talk about what our treatment looks like. This is not a neuroscience talk, so those of you that can do this much more in detail than I am, no judgment, okay? So post-traumatic stress disorder occurs if people have experienced or witnessed a traumatic event. It causes your brain to get stuck in danger mode. So even after you're no longer in danger, your body thinks you are, it continues to send out stress signals, and this leads to PTSD symptoms. So some of the common ones that we hear about are anxiety, avoidance, reliving traumatic events, intrusive memories, nightmares, and people tend to either be hyper-aroused or hypo-aroused. And it can make everything from holding a job, having a relationship, getting up in the morning, very difficult, and there's high suicide rates. So in parallel to those common side effects, there's also changes in brain activity. The amygdala, the part of the brain that handles fear and emotion, has an increased activity. And the prefrontal cortex, which plays a central role in cognitive functions such as reasoning, impulse inhibition, this area has a decreased activity. So why MDMA for this? Well, MDMA facilitates the opposite reaction in the brain. Through the release of neurohormones, there's an increase in empathy, a dampening of fear-related activity in the amygdala, and a decrease in stress response, while increasing the activity in the prefrontal cortex and cognitive function. And then the pharmacological properties of MDMA, when you combine it with therapy, produce what we call a window of tolerance. So this takes patients out of this either hypo or hyper-aroused state, and it puts them into a zone where they're able to revisit and process traumatic content without being overwhelmed by their symptoms. And this processing is what's necessary for the resolution of the PTSD. And without the MDMA, this is really hard to do for most people. This is why we see high dropout rates in trauma-focused therapies, and why treating just the symptoms with SSRIs doesn't really work. So we chose to study PTSD because it's extremely common, it's difficult to treat, there's not a lot of options, and it's a condition that has a serious impact on the lives of those who have it, their families, and their communities. There's over 300 million people suffering with it worldwide, and there's some groups that are even more vulnerable, such as veterans. Women are 2 times more likely to get PTSD. And no matter what demographic you look at, whether you're a vet, a woman, or general population, if you're a person of color or LGBTQI, you are at a higher risk to develop PTSD and yet less likely to receive a diagnosis or have a reasonable access to treatment. And when you look at the stats, most of the time you're only measuring the tip of the iceberg because you're looking at the cost to the healthcare system. And what's harder to measure is how difficult this is, not just on the person with PTSD, but how it affects their families, their communities, and the society in general. So with that, we have a drug, a condition, and a large need. So where are we with this? As of today, we've completed our phase 2 studies, and we've also completed our first and pivotal phase 3 study. The results were highly statistically significant. We had a good safety profile. These are published in Nature Medicine. I'm not going to go over them. You heard a little bit about them yesterday from Tor, and you can read them. We also had amazing news this month in that we completed our confirmatory phase 3's enrollment. So you need 2 phase 3 studies to get regulatory approval in the US, and so that means we're done with one and done enrolling the second one. So now we know when all of our data is going to be in. It should be the end of this year. And now we know that we'll also be submitting to FDA for our new drug application in 2023, which hopefully means approval in 2024 in the US, and then Canada and Israel because they're part of the same US program. And then we think the UK and the EU will be about a year behind as they need a separate phase 3. So what does this treatment look like? There's 3 parts. There's prep, there's the treatment, and then there's the integration. And this should sound very familiar because I think everybody has the same design and we heard about it yesterday. And over the years, we've demonstrated that the treatment program for most people looks like this. 3 preparatory sessions, 3 MDMA sessions. They're about a month apart. Each is followed by a series of 3 integration sessions. This takes place over 15 visits. It's about 4 months long, and this is what we're going to recommend in our package to FDA. But in the real world, we recognize that might not be the perfect fit for everyone, and we expect that people will be able to space the sessions further apart, have fewer sessions if that's what they need, and so it can be kind of individualized to the patient and left to the clinician's discretion. We do expect that there will be some type of regulatory requirement for the patient to be monitored for a certain length of time. We don't know what will be in the label. That's part of the negotiations, but we think around 6 hours based on our data. And we do think that integration and preparation sessions are essential, and that clinicians might want to do more of these or less of them, whatever is right to support the healing conditions for that person. We don't really think that that will be in the label, so we'll see what happens. We're also working to define the care that a patient receives when they get MDMA-assisted therapy and how the care will be delivered. We expect that the drug plus the therapy will be delivered in clinical settings. It's not a take-home, and there will be clinics of different types and sizes. And I think this partly depends on the country as well. In the US, there's going to be a lot of private practice, I assume. We expect that there will also be innovations such as telemedicine that can play a part in the non-drug visits. And we expect that the majority of patients will be treated by a care team of providers, each having a distinct role. So the medical provider who's there for ensuring that they're proper for the study and for writing the prescription, a licensed behavioral health provider who provides the supportive therapy, and then additional paraprofessional who is present with the behavioral health provider when the drug is administered, and they might also be a licensed behavioral health provider themselves, but we're trying for the second person to not require to be licensed, at least in the US. And again, this is going to be different in different countries, I'm assuming, with whatever the regulations are. And then how the providers set up their practice is not a place that's really up to the MAPS PBC. We won't be prescriptive about that. That's something that will evolve through the provider networks as they learn what works best for them. And again, it might be different in different countries in order to align with your healthcare system and what your payer plans require. We believe that even post-approval, supportive therapy will be necessary for preparing, supporting, and integrating. They're critical for safety and efficacy. And we also hope that the therapeutic approach stays the same. It's based on a philosophy that each person has within them an intrinsic wisdom and a natural ability to heal. The MDMA-assisted therapy is there to facilitate the recall of negative or threatening memories and catalyze the therapeutic processing by allowing patients to stay emotionally engaged while they revisit these traumatic experiences, but they can do so without being overwhelmed. And that the therapist would be present there to support the participant during that processing, and that they would be providing the type of therapy that would best meet that person's need in the moment. And that is what we call our inner-directed or non-directive therapy. We also believe that integration visits will be critical to supporting the unfolding insights that happen during those sessions and to help the participant make meaning out of what's been learned during the session and to support integration of that meaning into their lives. We also know that this treatment is not going to work for everyone. It doesn't work for everyone in the clinical trials, and it won't work for everyone post-approval. There's no one size that fits all. And so there's no one therapy that goes with MDMA that's going to work best for everyone. So as we negotiate these things, we're also going to be working to build in as much flexibility to what is approved as possible while maintaining what we think is essential for the safety and efficacy of the patients. The integration of a drug and a therapy introduces several unprecedented questions for regulators. Most important is, how will the therapy portion of the treatment be regulated, since therapy is outside of the regulatory agency's scope? Much of this is going to be decided out of our direct control, and it will be determined as we have discussions with our regulators. So I don't have a good view of what that will look like or what the label will say exactly. We'll know that much closer to the potential approval, but it will most likely say that this should be administered the way it was studied, which is in a therapeutic context with a trauma-focused therapy, and it probably will not require providers to do it exactly as I have described our model to be. So there'll be some flexibility, but it would say a trauma-focused therapy. And then the prescribing is going to also be defined by the label and by regulations around controlled substances per country. We'll also be negotiating in the US to determine if there is going to be something called a REMS. This is a risk evaluation and mitigation strategy. It's a program for certain drugs to ensure the benefits outweigh the known risks. We think that many of the parameters of how this is going to be used post-approval, just because it's of the way it was studied and the way that we think it's going to go into implementation, already cover a lot of the risks that a REMS would cover. So for instance, there's already limited dosing to mitigate side effects from long-term use or overdose. We already plan for direct observation dosing and per session packaging, and this would mitigate misuse or diversion. And administration with a supportive therapy would mitigate psychological distress that is unsupported. We don't know if these or other restrictions will be required in a REMS. We'll find out during our negotiations, and we're going to do our best as we go back and forth with regulators to strike the right balance between ensuring safety and integrity of the modality while also facilitating a broad access. We've set an ambitious goal of delivering 1 million MDMA sessions between the time that we launch the drug and 2029. This is really a preliminary estimate. It's based on the market research we've done to date, and it's likely to change. We think it's attainable, but we also know it's quite ambitious, and it's going to rely on how many people we can train. And one of the really necessary ingredients to achieving this is therapist capacity. This is a really demanding therapy, and no one can deliver it around the clock. So our estimates are, for our modeling, that we think about 30 sessions per therapy pair per year, and that would be about 10 to 15 patients, and that would be for somebody that's really working on this mostly full-time. And those of you that are therapists probably have, could tell me more if you think this feels like it's right or not, but this is what we've collected over the years. And I think some people will probably do more or less. It'll depend on the way people set up their practice. What these numbers don't address is that we also think that these therapists need to be the right therapist who will deliver both the best possible outcomes for patients and help this field to establish norms and systems of ethics, because this is an evolving area. It also calls for us to be quite innovative of how are we going to train all these therapists. So we think we'll be partnering with other groups who have training programs in behavioral health. And we are also focused on building out a diverse provider network in terms of racial and cultural identity and geography. We want to ensure that patients are able to access treatment with someone that they feel safe with. We think group therapy could be hugely impactful in reducing costs and enabling a limited supply of trained therapists to scale to meet up the demand. And we also think combining MDMA with other types of modalities is important for unlocking new providers as well. And there's studies in both of those areas that are underway. In the US, obtaining health insurance coverage does not automatically come with negotiations with HTAs. And so it's something that we're working on already, and it's going to be a major lever that we have to pull to ensure that we have access for people. And we think there's a strong clinical and economic case for the coverage. We have a high unmet need, and we're doing a lot of our long-term follow-up and developing our cost-effectiveness case. But there's also going to be a lot of operational challenges to overcome in order to ensure that there's payment. We have to have proper systems that we develop ahead of time with the payers, especially new codes that will be required in order to adequately cover what's necessary, which is the care team's time, the drug, and the therapy. So this will be something new for healthcare payers to deal with. In addition to our work obtaining health insurance for this, we also plan to implement our own patient support program. And the revenue that we have from the drug would go into this program, and this would be able to use to ensure that the drug cost is not a barrier to access for patients. And this is one of our core beliefs as a benefit corp. I want to highlight something that came out recently. I don't have the link up here, but it's a group, Brain Futures. They're an independent third party, and they help accelerate adoption of promising new mental health treatments. They work across many things, not just psychedelics. They have a white paper titled Expediting Psychedelic Assisted Treatment Adoption in Clinical Settings. if you want to take a look at it. The upshot is they said over the next year and a half, it is imperative that as a field that we focus on developing our standards of care, program accreditations, provider certifications, and reimbursement strategies if we're going to be successful. So that's a lot of US-focused stuff, I know. In parallel, we are also working on what this will look like in Europe. We've just started our phase 3 lead-in, and in Norway, we finished the phase 3 lead-in because y'all are so efficient. And the study's underway in these other countries, and then there'll be a phase 3 study that will follow. And we'll learn a lot as we implement this in the US, Canada, and Israel first, and then we'll also be looking at rest of world regulatory strategies as well. So this is what we hope for, beautiful psychedelic clinics. And I really thank you for supporting this vision and for the support that you'll be giving to make this reality true and something created by all of us. So thank you.